invest in yourself. Invest in yourself, whether that's reading a stupid amount of books or hiring a coach, bringing in someone to help and encourage you. And this can kind of go along with that last one, knowing that you are worth it. You have the ability to do this, but it does, there are so many things that you probably don't know. So take some of your funds or set aside some of your funds and invest in yourself.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time with us to chat. Now, today we've got another great podcast, or guest on the podcast, if I don't get too tongue-tied, which is Joe Newton. And give you a quick introduction to Joe. So has a degree in classical acting from college, and then got heavily involved in the community. Afterwards, he moved to Dallas, where he's from back to Dallas after school, and started a nonprofit theater with a high school buddy. Started to also run a small coffee shop, I think, and then realized that they should hire out, or he told his employer that he was helping to run the coffee shop that they should hire out his job and promote someone else. And so he talked himself out of a job, but then his wife encouraged him to get into real estate. So did that for a period of time, and learned about the systems and processes to make a profitable business and make that consistent. And then until about a year ago was figuring that out, and then systematized it, and that brings him to where he's at with his business today. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Joe.
Hey, Devin, thanks for the introduction. It's good to be here, man.
Absolutely. So I just compacted a much longer journey into about 30 seconds. So let's unpack that a bit. So tell us how your journey kind of got started with classical acting in college.
Yeah, so I knew growing up that I wanted to go to college, that it was a priority for me to go to college and get a degree. Had an awesome grandfather who grilled that into me and the other grandkids. But growing up, I also knew that I was not your star academic. And for me to finish a degree program, it was going to have to be something that I enjoyed. And that narrowed it down to either theater or history. And I was able to get more scholarships with theater and get into a great school. And that's kind of what led me into the classical acting vein there.
All right, so now you say, okay, I'm going to go and do classical acting. And now, was that because that was enjoyed and passion, or did you want to go in and be an actor and be in movies or in plays, or kind of what was the initial kind of prospects of what you wanted to do with that as you're getting the degree?
Yeah, I knew that I loved it. I enjoyed it, and specifically the communal aspect of it. So the program I was a part of, I went through all 4 years with the same 19 kids at that time. So we went through and had all of our theater classes together, and I loved the community. I loved building. I loved producing the theater, and I was thinking, yeah, after I graduated, I was planning to go to London actually for 6 months. I had my visa all worked out, and then 2008 happened and everything kind of fell apart, and I had to reorganize at that point, shall we say. And that kind of shifted gears for me, but I was planning on doing acting out of college.
All right, so now you're coming out of college saying, okay, I'm going to be doing acting, love being involved with the community. Housing market crashes about that time, along with a lot of other things that crashed along with
Right.
it. So you moved back, and so I think at that point you moved back to Dallas after graduating from school, and you got started in a nonprofit theater company. Is that right, with the high school buddy?
Yeah. So I was originally planning on just coming back to Dallas for the summer and then moving to Chicago to focus on acting there. But I had a good friend who was here in Dallas and said, "Hey, Joe, what would you think about starting a theater company?" And I said, "In Dallas?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "No, I don't want to stay back in Dallas. I've got plans to get out of here." Um, but it was amazing because all of these things started falling into place. SMU, which is a university here in Dallas, has a law program, and we were able to apply and basically get a free lawyer for a semester.
Hmm.
And they helped us set up the 501c3 for the nonprofit. He had an aunt and uncle who had some wealthy friends and said, "Hey, can we throw you a party with our friends and raise some money?" And all of these things fell into place. So before I knew it, I was helping to run a not-for-profit theater company in which we were creating our own work, but we were also doing a ton of educational stuff with schools and summer workshops, and that really was sort of my introduction, if you will, into running a company of any sort.
So now, so okay, and that makes sense. So you get in there and say, okay, we'll start this out. We got, some free legal representation, love being part of the community, think it would be a good, a fun and a worthwhile endeavor. So you get all of that going, and how did it go? Was it fun? Was it fun and exciting and loved it and passionate and, made a great business out of it and worked well with your high school buddy, or was it a burn in flames and it was a fun idea that never made it anywhere? Kind of where did it end up from there?
Yeah, great follow up and honest question. For us, it was a great success. We had some big goals for ourselves, and we were thinking, hey, in 5 to 7, 10 years, maybe we'll hit most of these. But we were able to achieve the vast majority of them within about 2 years. And some of those were putting on, getting in the schools and doing educational training for high school students, like we were, because we knew the benefit that it had for ourselves, and putting on a summer workshop for these students and creating our own work. And we brought another company in from Chicago to tour a show. So we were actually able to do almost everything outside of purchasing our own building, which was the one check mark we didn't end up doing. But for about 4 to 5 years, it did really well. I ended up getting to a point to where I had some other things going on in life that I decided to transition out. And my friend who I started it with, was going overseas and wanted to teach English and see the world. So we shut it down, liquidated it, but we were able to still have, I forget if it was $5,000 to $10,000 at the end of the day, that we were able to donate to another company who was doing similar work. So I would call it a success.
All right. Well, hey, but you put a check mark in the success column, that's always a win. So
Yeah.
now you're saying, okay, you did that for a period of time, you decided to shut it down, go separate ways, pursue other things. And I think at that point you got involved with working at a small local coffee shop. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of gap in between there, but that's some W-2 work and that sort of thing. But yeah, I ended up working at a coffee shop. Started off at the cash register, and within a couple of months had a ton of favor. And I was the general manager. Whether that was a good thing or a bad thing is probably for others to say. But I learned a ton at that point. Learned how to run a team, how to create checklist, how to do customers and stocking, and there was so much that I learned during that time. But like you mentioned in the intro, I did eventually figure out that the best thing that they could do was outsource half of my job to an outside accounting firm to do the books and the HR side. And then I had a right hand man, if you will, a young guy that I'd raised up, and it was going to be a lot cheaper to give him a little bit of a raise and have him run the day-to-day operations, which he was amazing at, and fire me and save about half of my salary. And when I brought that to them, because I felt like it was the best thing for the business, they thanked me and said, okay, if you're okay with it, yeah, we'll do that. So yeah, I did that and lost a job.
Now, just out of curiosity, I mean, because on the one hand, I'm sure the employer said, thank you for saving us money and helping us to reduce costs. On the other hand, it doesn't seem to be the best if you're intending to continue to work there and otherwise have a salary. It doesn't seem like the best career move, from the sense that now you're out of a job. So was the intent of, hey, so what was, was the intent of, I'll point this out and maybe they'll keep me on, or they'll be so glad that they'll give me a promotion? Or is it, hey, I have their best intent at heart, and if it doesn't make sense for me to be here, I'll find something else? Kind of how did that, as you were raising that issue, how did that go?
Yeah, it was really, I just had the best intentions for them. And again, my heart was like, this is what's best for the company. It's what you should do. There's no reason to keep paying me this money when it would be better for most everyone if you made that decision. And for better or worse, I didn't have a direct plan for myself after that. In fact, as I was trying to figure out what my next step was, that's when my wife said, "Hey, you've talked about real estate since I met you. Why don't you do that?" And we cussed and discussed with Mr. Budget and figured out a way that I could go and get my real estate license. And that was my intro back into the business world. And really, that's where my master's degree and what not to do and how to fail as quickly and as much as possible kicked in at that point.
So now you said, okay, wife, I'll listen to the, consultant Mr. Budget, listen to my wife, and she gives great advice, which our wives very often do. And so
It's
you say,
true.
okay, I'll go in and I'll try my hand at real estate. And so how did that kind of transition or shift go? Was it, got in there, flipped some houses, made lots of money, and you're rich and retired? Or was it, something more along, gonna, takes a while to learn the ropes or to build clientele, or kind of as you're saying, okay, I'm transitioning into this next phase? How did that work out?
Yeah, I learned a ton because anyone I'm sure who is listening to this and has started a business, unless you went to school for this beforehand, hits that point to where you realize you know nothing. And I had a ton of learning to do. Luckily, I was very blessed in that I had some mentors. There was another real estate agent, a guy I went to church with, and he was willing to take me to coffee at least once a week and pour into me and share what he knew. And he even gave me some opportunities starting off. I hired a coach at that point because I knew I needed it, and drank from the fire hose there. But there was still a ton of figuring out what's the difference. I didn't know that framework of a job versus a business at that point, and I had no idea what a system or a process was. So there was a lot of failing and both in learning to build my own real estate business. And then from there, I did get excited and started some other businesses. I started a flipping business. I tried to bring in a partner to build a team, and all of that failed miserably. The flipping business, we got funded, but we never ended up flipping one home. The business partner, I ended up
Now, let me
paying
ask
off.
just one quick
Oh, yeah.
question, because typically my very cursory knowledge, and I've never flipped a house or been into that, but it seems like if you had the funding, that would be the largest impediment to flip a house, is to have the funding to go get the house in order to fix it up and flip it. So what was the reason why, if you were funding, why
Yeah,
you didn't go and flip the house
that's
or flip a house?
a very good question and an astute observation. So yeah,
Thank
we
you. I
had
always try to make good
yeah.
observations, but go ahead.
So yeah, I went into business to flip homes with two other guys who I thought were good balances to my skills. I thought there was one guy who had some business acumen. I thought there was another guy who was a general contractor. I had the real estate background. It was like, great, we're checking on all the boxes here. I can find the properties, get the properties. This guy can flip them over, and then this other guy can turn this thing into a real business. But after a couple of months, and eventually what I figured out was I didn't ask enough questions going in.
Mhm.
And if I was to go back and do it differently now, one, I probably would try as hard as possible to figure out a way to make it happen without having other partners in the business, like maybe partner with people, but not necessarily have an ownership partnership to where I was so relied on them. Because
Mm.
what ended up happening was the general contractor came to the point where he said, "Hey, I only want to do homes that are within," I think it was like a 30 to 45-minute radius of his home base. And he lived in an area that he was very close to a lake, which
Mm.
meant a large portion of that radius was taken up by a lake. So there was now a much smaller area that we could find properties. And as anyone knows, within the last decade in most real estate markets within the United States, it's been shooting up, and it's harder and harder to find deals And when you limit that to such a small space, when you're first starting off, it was impossible to find anything that met the criteria, that was within that radius, that we could get a good return on. So all of those other boxes didn't get checked. And eventually it was like, hey, what are we doing here? Let's get honest. It's probably better that we quit wasting our time with this and move on. So that's what happened there, and was the lesson learned, is not digging in enough before creating a partnership.
Well, I think that's fair enough, and I think that it's one where a lot of times it's a lesson you simply have to learn in this, because a lot of times you go in, oh, the partnerships are great, we're friends, or we get along well together, and then you get into a business, and businesses put different restraints on the relationship, and everybody has different expectations as far as how much they're going to work and what they're going to contribute, and kind of going down that line to where the best laid plans maybe don't work out quite like you had expected when you get into that. So you're saying, okay, tried it, had the funding, but couldn't quite work the parameters, didn't quite work with the partner, bottom out, kept doing that for a period of time. And I think it kind of throughout that transitional period, you also got into doing you're doing a real estate boot camp, and you saw a guy that was, had a high level results, and that kind of changed a bit of your trajectory.
Yeah. So around this time, like you said, I took a boot camp that I signed up for with a guy named Joshua Smith. If you Google Joshua Smith real estate or podcast, he'll probably pop up. And he's big, muscle bound guy, bald, tattoos, cusses like a sailor. But in him, I saw someone who was consistently getting a high level result with his real estate teams, as well as he was taking that same knowledge and building businesses in totally unrelated fields. Like he had at least two other businesses that had to do with fitness and nutrition. And so I knew he had something that I was missing, and I signed up for that boot camp. And during that boot camp, he really hit home for me the importance of systemization and identifying systems and processes to have consistency within your business. And that was mind blowing to me, and a really big watershed moment that led me to start reading, the E-Myth and Traction and all these other books, which bring up and say, hey, you need to systematize your business. So that was, yeah.
So now you say, and I think that I think that getting systems in place can have a big impact. And yet it's oftentimes overlooked in the sense that you're just trying to run. So, hey, if I work harder, not, more organized or smarter type of a thing. And I think there's a cliche, because you can only work so smart, and you do still have to work very hard. But there is a portion of it where you do have to have some systems and processes in place. And it certainly increases the odds of having a successful business. And so now you're saying, okay, got that insight, got that initial mentorship, dug into a lot of books, and got a lot of that information. And as you're doing all of that, creating the systems, did you continue just to implement those in while you're doing with real estate, or did that pivot your business, or kind of where did that lead to where you're now at today?
Yeah, I did. I implemented that within my real estate business. So I identified what those key systems were. I was creating the documentation. Granted, it took me a lot of time to do that and figure out what worked and what didn't work well. But I saw an improvement within my own business, and eventually I started my own brokerage and was able to build up a small team to utilize those. And then about a year or two ago, I was running a mastermind, and some of the guys who were in that mastermind, who were also business owners, entrepreneurs, were having the problems of not having systems within their business. So I was helping them kind of as one-offs, just doing some consulting and helping them. And I realized that I enjoyed that way more than the real estate. And at the beginning of this year, I decided to make that into a business. And I found out about the Systemology Framework, which is basically a system for systemizing your small business. And that's what I've been focusing on full time now, is helping business owners get out of the day-to-day operations so that they can focus on what they do best through that.
No, and I think that's great, and the better you get the systems in place, I think more consistent product you have, and you also are getting a much more likelihood of success, because now if you get something done. It's done in a timely manner. It's done right, and it's otherwise not, always behind the eight ball or apologizing for people being late. One, it makes your business better, and two, it also, as you grow and expand, makes it easier to scale. So
Oh,
now as
for
you
sure.
transition to doing that systems, so do you go out and do you kind of as a gun for hire, so to speak, and you go work for other businesses, or do you have a exclusive clientele, or how do you kind of offer that as a service and turn that into a business?
Yeah, so I work one-on-one with a lot of small businesses. My meat and potatoes, if you will, who I'm able to serve best are those business owners who have hired their 2 to 3 employees, all the way up to businesses that have around 50 employees. And they're getting to that place where they've kind of hit that ceiling, and they're realizing that they are really the bottleneck within their company, that things continue to come back to them, or they're really key person dependent. Maybe they have an amazing salesperson, but if they lost that salesperson, they would lose their sales department. And I come in usually for about 3 months at a time as the initial engagement, and I help them identify what those mission critical systems are. We extract those from their key knowledge workers, and we organize them in a way that people can easily access and use, take away the friction, so that their team will actually want to use the systems and reference them. And then I try to train someone in their organization up to be a systems champion, to be someone who knows how to identify, create, and update systems, so that it can start to become a cultural aspect of the company, and not have to be something that they continually have to bring someone else in to do. So
No, and I think that's definitely worthwhile. I'm sure that it takes a bit of convincing for people to acknowledge and make or that it is worthwhile investment, because it is an investment in both time and money to be able to get those systems in place. But definitely once you get those figured out, and it's interesting, I work in the legal industry and help a lot of clients, and I look at everything from other small law firms to large law firms I worked with, and the level of systems they have in place is oftentimes next to nothing, and yet it's an area that you could definitely have a lot of systems in place. And so one of the things that as we started my law firm and did that a few years ago, we are continually both getting initial systems in place to automate, offload, and otherwise get a more consistent product. And what we found is, one is it frees up more of our time. We can actually have more hands-on, or more interaction and human interaction with the client, because we're not doing so
yeah.
much monotonous work. But two, it also allows us to scale, and so we're not having to bring on as many people to get the same amount of work done, because we have those systems otherwise in place that allows us to accomplish the same thing with a smaller amount of workforce. And so I think definitely would be a cheerleader in your camp, so to speak. Well, as we were to wrap up, but we have the 2 questions I always ask at the end of the podcast. We'll do those in just a second. As a reminder to the audience, we'll also do the bonus question. We talked a little bit about intellectual property, and have a conversation there. But before we dive to that, doing the normal 2 questions on the each podcast, we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
This is, I'm sure with a lot of your guests, there's an overabundance of options for the answer to this. I would say probably the worst decision that I made was thinking that I had to have a partner. And I made that over and over again, thinking that I wasn't capable of creating and operating a business by myself, simply because I hadn't done it before. And as I shared earlier, you saw with the flipping company, and then I had another partner that I brought in to try to build a real estate team, who that went very similarly because of that lack of confidence. And so that's the biggest thing. I wish I had the confidence to think, you know what, I can do this myself. And if I'm lacking here and there, I can go find the answer, but I don't need someone to hold my hand to do it.
No, and it isn't just because I laugh at a bit of the parallels, because when I got into doing my own law firm and I brought on the first few attorneys, the typical law firm model is, you work for them for a long enough period of time and you make partner. And,
Yeah.
I went through that with some of the attorneys I had, and I just kind of, after kind of wrestling with it and thinking about and how I wanted to do it and what that would look like, I just came to the conclusion, you know what, I don't want a partner. I want some great employees. I want people that are on the team that we're looking in the same direction, well compensate them, take their, their input into account and everything of that nature, want the sounding boards and a lot of that. But I just said, one of the things I really enjoy about my business, at least the way I run it, is I don't have to go and I can make the decisions. I can pivot, we can adjust, we can implement things,
Yeah.
try things out. And anytime you bring in a partner, it just, for me, for my personality, just said, hey, it's just not, it's going to turn the business that I love into something I don't want to, or a place I don't want to work for. So I think that there is a lot of times that inherent bill or pressure that you need to have a partner. And yet a lot of times it's just saying, hey, I'm happy to do it on my own. I can have mentors, I can have employees, I can have sounding boards, but at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I just want to do my own thing.
Yeah.
So, okay, second question is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Invest in yourself. Invest in yourself, whether that's reading a stupid amount of books or hiring a coach, bringing in someone to help and encourage you. And this can kind of go along with that last one, knowing that you are worth it. You have the ability to do this, but it does, there are so many things that you probably don't know. So take some of your funds or set aside some of your funds and invest in yourself, because you're gonna need help, but you need to invest in yourself to build this business. Don't give up, but invest in yourself.
No, and I think that that's a great piece of advice. And oftentimes it's one where you hear it and you say, yeah, I should invest myself. And I say, well, I've got too busy. I don't have time. And, that's where I
Yeah.
think that finding the ways that you can invest yourself. One of the things I often do is, in addition to having this podcast, I also love listening to podcasts. And that's a way for
Yeah.
me to garner a lot of knowledge and get, and be able to invest at that time and getting ideas. And I'll listen to, law firm marketing podcasts. I also listen to real estate marketing podcasts because they're really great. If you get a good one, they're really great at sales and looking at what other ways to build a business and, listening at those. And I think in that investment can reap a lot of rewards. And, it sounds easy on the front end. Yeah, I should definitely invest in myself. But when you're in the trenches of building a business, oftentimes it gets pushed aside. So I think it's a great piece of advice. Well, before we jump to the bonus question, as we wrap up the normal portion of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, or find out more?
Yeah. So I was going to create a link specifically for your audience. If they go to eijsystems.com/inventive journey, I'll put a link up there. You can schedule a time. We can grab a virtual coffee, if you will. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have, or if your best friend worthy, ask you some questions. And I'll also throw a link on there to my system for creating systems. And for those of you who are at the point to where you're beginning to thinking about systematizing your business, or even if you're in the early stages, take a look at that. It's an example of how a good system is organized, as well as it'll walk you through the steps. It's not rocket science. So I'll throw that up if that's helpful as well.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to check out the link and make those connections, whether it's a next best friend or the next best client you pick up. Definitely worthwhile to make those connections either way. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. Also make sure to subscribe and share the podcast so everybody can find out about our awesome episodes and hear everybody else's journeys. And last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. So now as we transition and we jump from your journey to, shifting gears a little bit and talking about a little bit of a subject that's always near and dear to my heart, which is intellectual property, I turn the microphone over to you for a bit to ask your number one intellectual property question.
Yeah. And this would be a two-parter, if you will, maybe get some bonus question here. I'm curious, one, is there, when it comes to like a trademark, or you're starting a new business, a new brand, when is the time to start thinking about the trademarking and that sort of area? And along with that, so that you don't waste someone like yours time, is there a place to where you can easily search and say, hey, does someone already have my brand? Is this already trademarked? Should I, do I need to shift gears even before I try to engage someone like Devin?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great or two-parter question and happy answer. So, I mean, on the first point, it is always a balance in the sense that, the very easiest answer is the earlier the better as far as when you start thinking about trademarks, because you're going to invest time, money, and effort to build a business, and the last thing you want to do is come to find out that either one, the trademark's taken and you're infringing someone else's, or two, you build a business and now somebody else comes along and is trademarked it afterwards and they're boxing you out, or you're going to have to rebrand, all of which are not, are desirable outcomes. And so, earlier the better. Now, within that, I also get that startups and small businesses, you always have more things to spend money on than money to spend. And so you're always, saying, hey, do I do marketing and sales? Do I do SEO? Do I do Google AdWords? Do I do new employees? Do I do pay rent? Do I make payroll? Or do I pay legal fees? And legal fees, or legal services are oftentimes moved down the list because it doesn't feel like it's quite as urgent. So my general
Right.
rule of thumb is if you're just getting a business up and going, first of all, make sure you get the business up and going, because great if you get a trademark. If the business never makes it, it doesn't matter that you have a trademark for business is dead. But if you're getting to the point of saying, as you're getting up and going to where you're investing, quite a bit of either time, money, and effort, any or all of the above, to building that brand, you're saying, hey, we're going to do a big push, we're going to do a big marketing spend, we're going to do a guerrilla marketing, or any of those, and you're saying it's going to be a big investment by the company, and such that this brand is starting to get value, and people are actually going to associate the service with us, you're getting to the point where you're going to want to get a trademark for it. And really the rule of thumb I give is, if you're getting to the point that if you had to ouch factor, if you had to rebrand, if you had to change the branding or the trademark, you had to change the name of the company, if you're saying, hey, yeah, it'll take a little bit of money and effort, but it's really not that big of a deal, you probably haven't reached that, that level that a trademark's important enough to you to pursue. But on the other hand, you're saying, no, if we had to rebrand, man, that would be a pain. We've done all these efforts, we've spent all this time, money, and effort, and everything else. If we had to rebrand, that would be a big deal to the company, and really wouldn't want to do that. Well, but if you're reaching that point, it doesn't even have to be at that point, but if you're starting to reach that point, that's when you should consider getting a trademark. Now, if you're starting out to the second part of your question, saying, hey, I'm just getting going, want to see, is this trademark available? Definitely you can hire a trademark attorney. And if you have the funds, I would, whether it's us or somebody else, I would definitely encourage that, because there's a lot of experience and things that you don't know as to whether or not this would be a stopping factor or not, that you may say, hey, somebody else is taking the same work, but it could be for completely different services or products or unrelated, and it would be a non-issue, and yet it scares people off. But if I also, as I mentioned, you don't always have those funds at the beginning, so you can go to the USPTO website. If you just were to search USPTO trademark search, it'll pop up. You can go and they'll have just a database that you can start to search, and you can at least get a general understanding of what other trademarks have already been filed, which ones are out there, and whether or how crowded or how clear of a field it is to use the name of your business. So that's where I would start. And then as you were to get, the funds or the budget in place, I would definitely loop in an attorney, because it's a lot more nuanced than you might think, but it's better to get something or get an initial understanding and take a bit of time on your own before you go into an attorney. So with that, hopefully it answers your question. And it was a fun bonus question to go through. And we'll go ahead and wrap up the podcast again. Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.